Some of you need to hear this straight. You can call yourself awakened and still be the most unstable person in your household. You can talk about light and still leave darkness everywhere you step. You can even brag about your consciousness, but still break every promise that requires discipline. An awakening doesn't make you a better man, and it doesn't make you a better woman. It just makes you more responsible. And it makes you more responsible for your behavior, to be specific, because now you can't pretend you didn't know. And I want to say this very clearly because some of you have been hiding behind spirituality long enough. If you betray yourself, you will betray everyone connected to you. Your inconsistency will become their instability. Your lack of discipline will become their confusion. And your ego absolutely becomes their emotional damage. And that's the truth of false light. You know, it's the truth that false light will never, ever tell you. So I want to speak to both sides of the people who are here. I want to speak to the ones who have been hurt by all of this, the ones who kept dealing with partners, with parents, with friends, with spiritual leaders who claimed awakening but lived with no discipline, no emotional control, no reliability, no accountability. You've been sort of carrying the weight of someone else's undisciplined life. You have been walking around on eggshells because they don't know how to manage their own emotions. You've been calming storms that they created with their lack of order. And you've been forgiving chaos that they blamed on their spiritual journey. Some of you have been probably thinking, you know, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the unstable one. Maybe I'm the problem. You're not. You're not. You're not crazy. You're not tripping. You're not overreacting. You're dealing with someone who uses awakening like a costume and uses spirituality as an excuse to avoid becoming an actual adult. So listen, please, this is an important message. No one becomes a better parent. No one becomes a better leader. No one becomes a better partner just because they've had a vision. They become better through discipline. They become better through consistency. They become better through honesty. They become better through impeccability. See, that's the part that the false light hides. So today I'm speaking to both sides, to the ones who keep letting themselves down. Your excuses in here. And to the ones who've been harmed by undisciplined people, your clarity begins here. This insight is not about awakening anymore. We've covered that the past several segments. It's about becoming someone who is safe, someone who is stable, someone who is grounded, someone who is trustworthy for yourself and for the people who are tied to your life. I want to get into it. I'm Chief Yuya, Chief Jegna of the ANU Nation. chief priest of the ANU Life Global Ministries. Awakening exposes you, but it doesn't change you. See, that's where most people get lost. They confuse insight with evolution. They think because they see differently that they now automatically live differently. They don't. You can gain awareness and still keep the same sloppy habits. That is your right. You can even speak profoundly. You can speak profound truths and still lie to yourself every day. You can teach discipline and still avoid every uncomfortable task in your life. Awakening doesn't give you strength. What awakening does is it reveals how much strength you still need. So in speaking to this, let me speak to the people who this behavior harms. Some of you have been misled by someone who called themselves awakened, but lived like a storm you were forced to manage. They use spirituality as a mask, and they used it to hide their immaturity. They used healing language to cover up inconsistency. And many of them, they talked about truth while at the same time living in gross contradictions. And you felt crazy trying to make sense of it. I'm going to free you from that confusion. Awakening without discipline produces instability, and unstable people create unstable relationships. You were not imagining it. You thought you were imagining it. You were not imagining it. You were not exaggerating it. You were dealing with inconsistency disguised as enlightenment. And when someone awakens but refuses to grow, they become unpredictable. They break commitments. They create emotional whiplash. And they shift blame when their lack of order hurts others. So you end up apologizing for problems that you didn't even create. You end up playing parent, playing therapist, playing stabilizer for someone who refuses to stabilize themselves. You deserved better clarity than that. Now let me speak to the ones who are causing the chaos. If you've awakened but your discipline hasn't changed, you haven't grown. You've just added new vocabulary to the same problems. You can call it shadow work. You can call it spiritual warfare. You can call it energy shifts. But if your habits remain the same, your results remain the same. Mainly because awakening is not transformation. Transformation requires work to change your form, to transform. It requires consistency. It requires impeccability. It requires follow through. It requires restraint. It requires self-honesty. If you refuse that work, then your awakening just becomes a weapon. And the closest people to you will feel the blade of that weapon. Now let me talk to the ones who are been wounded by that blade. Your spirit is not flawed. Your expectations were not too high. You weren't asking for something unreasonable. You were asking for consistency. You were asking for accountability. You were asking for emotional reliability. Um, you were asking for grounded leadership. You were asking for a stable presence. And those things are not luxuries. They are the bare minimum any awakened person should offer you. If someone's spiritual growth creates more chaos than clarity, or creates more emotion than responsibility, or more excuses than action, then it is not growth. It is false light, as we have been speaking about. And you are not obligated to be the casualty of their inconsistencies. Speaking now to both parties, both groups, as loud and clear as I can. Awakening without discipline creates victims. Awakening with discipline creates leaders. So one path drains people and the other path protects them. So you make the decision which path you're going to walk on. There's only two paths a person can take in life. There's only two. Not 10, not 5, not 7, not 8, not 12. There's only two. There's the path of the ordinary, and then there's the path of the warrior. So first I will begin you, or start you with the path of the ordinary. An ordinary person doesn't necessarily lack awakening. They can be woke. An ordinary person says they'll change until it becomes uncomfortable. An ordinary person will set goals until discipline is required. They will take responsibility until their emotions hit. They'll even seek spiritual knowledge, but refuse spiritual accountability. An ordinary person talks about truth while living in contradiction. They want growth, but they don't want any pressure. They want to be healed, and they want healing, but they don't want any discomfort. They want power, but they don't want any preparation for power. So they break their own word, and then they blame the world for the consequences of them breaking their own word. Most people stay ordinary because ordinary feels familiar. Now, I'm going to speak to the people who suffer at the hand of ordinary people because of this. Some of you have lived with, or you have worked with, an ordinary person who pretended to walk a warrior's path. So they talked like a sage, but they actually lived like a child. They promised change, but all they delivered were these cycles. They apologized, but they never adjusted. And they claimed awakening, but never showed any actual stability. And they left you sorting through the chaos that their inconsistency created. Listen to me. Just because someone is awakened, it doesn't mean that they're safe. Awareness without any discipline creates harm. Just like a vision without consistency will create instability. When you have emotions and you don't have any boundaries, you create confusion. So you were not overreacting. You were not being unreasonable. You were dealing with someone who refused to master themselves, but expected you to tolerate the consequences. Now let me speak to the warrior's path. A warrior is not perfect. A warrior is impeccable. So a warrior is not always confident. A warrior is consistent. A warrior doesn't speak to or do to seek praise. A warrior always seeks order. A warrior seeks responsibility. A warrior seeks clarity. A warrior seeks integrity. A warrior does not wait to feel ready. A warrior acts because action is required. So their discipline is not about ego, it's about protection. And a warrior is seeking to protect their purpose, to protect their household, to protect their peace, and to protect the people who walk with them. A warrior understands that if they can't trust themselves, then no one around them is safe. So their presence becomes stable because they have made themselves stable. Their leadership becomes valuable because they have mastered their own impulses. A warrior's relationship strengthen because the warrior doesn't create chaos through inconsistency. Now I'm going to speak to the ones who were harmed by the ordinary. That warrior that I described, that's the standard. That's what you should have received. That's what you deserved all along if you were in the right space. A warrior creates peace. A warrior doesn't create confusion. A warrior provides clarity, not a whole bunch of emotional debris. A warrior brings structure. A warrior doesn't bring instability disguised as spirituality. So please don't ever again mistake awakening for reliability or mistake passion for discipline. Never mistake potential for character. The warrior's path is a very rare path, and you are right to expect it. You were not crazy for wanting consistency. You were not wrong for seeking stability. You simply just needed someone who chose the warrior's path instead of performing the warrior's path. Now, every person has an enemy inside of them. I'm not speaking about a demon. I'm not speaking about an outside force. I'm not speaking about a curse, a voice. It's a soft, persuasive voice. It's familiar. It sounds like you, but it works against everything that you claim that you want. So I'm going to speak to the ones who keep sabotaging themselves first. Your internal saboteur is not loud. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't yell. It whispers. It whispers delays. It whispers rationalizations. It whispers comfort. It's that voice that doesn't stop you with any sort of blunt force. It stops you with convenience. The whisper of, you deserve a break. You could do it later. You've had a long day. Let's start fresh tomorrow. Come on, this isn't that serious. Another popular one. No one will ever notice. See, every time you listen, you betray your own progress and you break the word that you've given. You dull your own edge when you listen. And what happens is that you end up weakening your own momentum. A warrior understands most destruction happens quietly. It doesn't happen through disasters, but through daily negotiations with the saboteur. It's not that you failed once. It's that you failed to do consistently. So I will speak to those who have been damaged by that. Some of you have lived with someone whose saboteur ran their entire life. You witnessed them sabotage their goals. You saw them sabotage their relationships. You saw them sabotage even their own promises. And eventually what ended up happening is that they sabotaged you. You kept hoping consistency would eventually appear, but it never did, because they never confronted the enemy inside of themselves, the part that avoids accountability, the part that deflects responsibility, and the part that blames everything except their own habits. And what you ended up doing is you carried the weight of that neglect. You felt the instability of their choices, and you lived with the consequences of their lack of discipline. You cleaned up messes created by a person who refused to clean up their own. Listen to me. You weren't too demanding. You were dealing with someone who surrendered to their saboteur long before they ever failed you. They already had surrendered to their saboteur. So you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum. What's that? Self-control, follow through, reliability. So now if I'm speaking to the ones who keep sabotaging themselves, your saboteur is not trying to ruin you quickly. It doesn't work that way. Your saboteur wants you to ruin yourself slowly, ruin yourself quietly, ruin yourself comfortably, so that by the time you realize your potential is gone and your relationships are broken, you won't even know what happened or why. So your job as a warrior is to become conscious of the voice and treat it like the enemy that it is. Not with the emotion, but with discipline. So a warrior doesn't argue with the saboteur. The warrior overrides the saboteur. The warrior outworks the saboteur. The warrior moves anyway. The ones who have been harmed by the sabotage, stop internalizing someone else's inconsistency. Stop blaming yourselves for their lack of discipline. Stop shrinking your expectations to match their failures. Someone else's undisciplined life is not your burden to carry. And the moment you realize that truth is the moment you can reclaim your mental clarity. There are things you need to be able to say to yourself, and things that you need to be able to repeat and to own, because there comes a moment in every person's journey when excuses are no longer working, and when explanations stop mattering, and there comes that time when a person's past stops being enough to justify the present. That's a moment where you choose not necessarily who you want to be, but who you are finally willing to become. So I'm going to speak to those who keep breaking their word, and their word is not bond. Your life will not change until your agreements with yourself change. Not the agreements that you post online, not the resolutions that you make at a certain time of year because you're excited and there's all of this jubilation, not the declarations you say out loud but betray in private. I'm referring to the quiet agreements, the sacred agreements, the ones that nobody hears but everyone can feel. A warrior knows this one simple truth. If my word means nothing to me, then my life will mean nothing to me. So an important thing that you have to say in a very sharp way, in a very simple way, an unavoidable way to yourself is, from this day forward, I do not break promises to myself. I do not negotiate with weakness. I do not surrender my old patterns. I do not, or surrender to my old patterns. I do not betray the path I have chosen. And you're not saying that to impress anyone. You're saying that to anchor yourself. Now, on the other side, so I'm speaking to different groups, the ones who have been harmed by broken promises and inconsistent people. The oath is not yours to carry, that I just said. Your oath is a bit different. Your vow is a boundary. You need boundaries. I will no longer excuse inconsistency. I will no longer shrink myself to make chaos comfortable. I will no longer tolerate cycles disguised as growth. I will no longer confuse awakening with reliability. I will no longer remain loyal to instability. See, your oath is about protection, protection of your spirit, protection of your peace, protection of your emotional stability. You're not responsible for the discipline someone else refuses to build. You're not obligated to accept their potential at the cost of your mental sanity. You're not required to dim your clarity because someone else refuses to confront their saboteur. So for both of you, for the inconsistent, your vow has to be to rise. And for the harmed, your vow has to be to stop lowering yourself. See, that's the impeccability. Impeccability means this. It means I don't lie to myself. It means I don't lie about myself. I don't let myself down. And I don't enable people or anyone who lets themselves down either. See, that's how warriors are made and how victims are freed. That's how a man or how a woman becomes trustworthy. This is how a home becomes stable and how a soul becomes grounded. This is how you take spiritual talk and convert it into spiritual truth. You've awakened, you woke. Good. Now live in a way that proves it. That's the oath that you have to take. Thank you. I'm Chief Yuyan, Chief Jegna of the ANU Nation. Thank you for spending this time with me. And willfully, I have said something to spark your thought and your consciousness and your sense of warriorhood and the ability to identify real warriors from those who are just playing the role. Make sure you visit ANU Life Global Ministries or anulifeglobal.org and go to the shop page and find new products up there, as well as free books, free guides, free glossaries, and consider applying and becoming a part of this beautiful ministry and this beautiful movement of learners, knowers, astral mates, and people from the heavens. Thank you so much. Willfully, you learned something. And if you have, and if your compass is pointing in the right direction, reach out. Feel free to share. Drop it in the comments. Apply to ANU. Turn that thought and that revelation and that awakening that maybe you've even gotten out of this segment, turn it into action. All right? Make it real. Make it authentic. And make it something of value. Turn it into real legacy. All right? Shalom alaikum.